Good evening. I'm bringing you live tonight ghost stories. I'd love to know if you enjoy ghost stories yourselves. And if you do, why do you think it is that you love ghost stories? I do love ghost stories. And I think it's because you get to enjoy a vicarious thrill of fear by being scared of the ghosts that might be around you. You work yourself up into a terror, and you might be looking over your shoulder all the time when you're listening or reading ghost stories. I love actually being read to or reading to people. It's great to share ghost stories if you can with a captive reader. I think when you listen or read a ghost story, you feel incredibly cozy because you're ideally sitting by a fire or on your sofa, curled up with a blanket. And there's something about the terror of the ghost stories that you're reading that makes you feel incredibly, comparatively cozy and calm. Obviously, that's not always the case, and you can just make yourself absolutely terrified, which has happened to me when I've been reading some of the stories for tonight, getting prepared for this evening. I got absolutely terrified by the sound of the cat outside my door trying to come in. I sometimes close the door to keep the peace. And then I hear the cat scrabbling at the door. And that is absolutely terrifying if you happen to be reading a ghost story at the time. Are you lovers of the ghost tale, or do you avoid them like the plague? Do let me know. I do feel constantly surrounded by ghosts myself. And I'm actually wearing this dress, which I don't know if you can see very well, but it's from my grandparents' attic, and it's definitely about 100 years old. Um, and that is therefore quite a ghostly kind of garment. I'm also wearing an earring, pure ruby, I wish, which was given to me by Michael Joberty in Trinidad. And he was very tragically murdered. And so there's something very ghostly about this earring that I'm wearing. And this would actually have a very big tale to tell. But that is for another day. Ollie, great to see you. I'm glad that you're a lover of ghostly stories. Do share your favourites. I'd love to know what they might be because everyone has their own favourite stories. And I was just talking about being surrounded by ghosts constantly. I'm wearing this dress, which makes me think of my grandparents' house, which was absolutely full of ghosts because it was an 11th century house in Devon. And my mum wore this dress too, so it makes me think of her. Also, this earring, which is a magpie, makes me think of my mum, who is sadly no longer with us. And she always used to tell us the rhyme of the blackbirds or the magpies: one for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, and so on. So that earring also symbolises my mum. Colleen, great to see you this evening. I wonder if you're a lover of ghost tales. Do let me know. I would love to hear everyone's favourite ghost stories if you have them. And I'm going to be sharing some old and some new this evening. So some might be familiar, some might not. But I'm going to start with this lovely collection, which is very recently published, only this year, which is called The Haunting Season: Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights. It's actually the perfect book for you to get right now if you are a lover of ghost stories. And this has a collection of wonderful, chilling, scary ghost stories by some very exciting modern authors. So we have Bridget Collins, Imogen Hermes Gower, Natasha Pulley, Jess Kidd, Laura Purcell, Andrew Michael Hurley, Kieran Millwood Hargreave, and Elizabeth McNeil, all with their versions of terrifying tales, which I'm pretty sure I haven't read all of them, but I've read most of them. I think I'm right in saying that they're all set in the past, and they're all exactly the kind of stories that take you into a big old country house with a roaring, crackling fire. And they're just the perfect, chilling, terrifying, but also coziness inducing short stories about ghosts. And I'm going to share with you a couple of sections of them so that you get a little bit of a hint of what they're like. So the first one that I want to share with you is the first story in the book, and it's called A Study in Black and White by Bridget Collins. Collins wrote The Binding, which might be a book that some of you have read, which is an absolutely fantastic story and not really ghostly, but supernatural, which is all about people putting their traumas into books. I don't want to tell you too much about it if you haven't read it, but it's a really fascinating, brilliant premise, which I think anyone that loves a ghost story is bound to love The Binding as well. So in this story, which is called A Study in Black and White, there's a man who is going his merry way to stay in a lodging house on his bicycle. And as he's cycling along, he sees this fascinating black and white house. And as he's cycling past it, he sees that the hedges look like chess pieces. They're topiary cut into chess pieces. And he's fascinated by the house, drawn to it. That night, he goes to a pub, meets someone, talks about the house, and realizes that he could rent it, decides to go and look at it. And before he knows what's going on, he's actually staying that very night in this house. But he does manage to light a fire. And I won't tell you what happens because it is a really wonderfully chilling story. But I'll just read you a little bit because I think it's a great little section of ghostliness. The agent had called the house furnished, but it was more than that. It gave the impression of having been left untouched, of being abandoned between one chime of the clock and the next. Only one room was in perfect order, a child's bedroom at the back of the house, with a neat shelf of toys, a miniature cricket bat propped in a corner, and in the window seat, a child-sized chessboard and a pile of books. Morton paused in the doorway. Then he shut the door with more force than he needed and moved. It's always a warning sign in a ghost story, isn't it? When there's a child's bedroom that's been untouched. Never, things are never going to work out when you have that kind of plot twist going on. Ollie, I'm glad to hear that you love The Binding. Isn't it such a great book? I bet there's a few others of you out there that have read it. If you haven't, do get it immediately. It's a great book for people that love books because it's all about how you put your innermost emotions into books, and possibly they can be trapped there, some would say. Anyway, here we are in Bridget Collins's story, A Study in Black and White, which has a strong chess theme going on. He stood up, brushed ash from the knees of his trousers, and crossed to the window to draw the curtains. As he drew them across, he paused, struck by the sight of the gardens. The moon had risen, tinting the lawn silver. The trees, and under its wintry glare, the whole world was transformed into pearl and ebony. It was otherworldly, alien, and Morton thought he had never seen anything so lovely. But he was not the sort of man to be seduced by anything so intangible as beauty. He closed the curtains with such a decisive jerk that a cloud of dust made him cough and turned back into the room. His eye was caught by a decanter of brandy on the sideboard. He sniffed it, at first gingerly, And then exultantly, who wouldn't be happy to find a decanter of brandy in a deserted, haunted house? We don't know if it's haunted yet. And poured a generous measure into one of the glasses that sat beside it. Then he settled beside the hearth, leant back on the couch, and presented the soles of his shoes to the fire. He congratulated himself. A house like this for a minimal rent. The brandy was excellent. The fire was taking the chill out of the air. And after the morning's exercise and the afternoon's unexpected events, he felt almost light-headed. He could feel the heat lapping around his ankles, spreading out into the rest of the room. The crackles of the flames were accompanied by the roar of air in the chimney and the groans of old walls settling. The joists overhead murmured a little as the warm air reached them. As Morton's eyes began to close, he heard a long chain of thuds along the floor approaching him, and he jolted upright, his heart in his mouth, half expecting to see someone there. His eyes took a moment to focus. That's as far as I've got. And I'm not going to tell you any more because you should actually read that story. That is a story for people that are just joining in the haunting season, which is a really lovely, beautiful new collection of short stories, ghost stories. And that particular story is called A Study in Black and White by Bridget Collins, who wrote the binding. And it has this really sinister and fabulously worrying chess theme where there's a chessboard on the table next to the fire, which is all laid out beautifully. And every time he turns his back, one of the chess pieces moves, which I know is an obvious cliched ghost story trope, but it's nonetheless absolutely terrifying. And I won't tell you what happens, but there's a lot of chills in this story, which is the first one of the collection. And another one that I particularly enjoyed from this collection is Thwaites' Tenant by Imogen Hermes Gower, who wrote The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, which I bet is another novel that lots of you here will have read. It's an absolutely brilliant novel, which is incredibly atmospheric, and so is Thwaites' Tenant, which is a very alarming story about a young woman with a small child who goes to stay in a deserted house yet again. And she discovers that this deserted house is where her own father used to take his mistresses. And so a lot of bad things have happened in this deserted house where she's now staying alone with her child abandoned by her father. And there's a rather terrifying ghost there. I don't want to give too much away, but this is one of the stories where there's actually a benign ghost who helps and actually is instrumental in bringing things to a positive pass. So this is a great collection. I definitely urge you to get it if you haven't already. And if you love a good ghost story, it's a great one to read by the fire on an autumn evening. Talking of ghostly collections, I just wanted to mention a couple of other favourites. Reality and Other Stories by John Lanchester is a great collection that came out a couple of years ago, and it has some really good stories which are actually relating to technology. So there's one that's all about a kind of reality TV show, and there's also one that's about a haunted mobile phone. And it's a really great, fun collection. Brilliant writer, John Lanchester. Another couple of great collections. This one is a classic, Ghost Stories, the Everyman collection of ghost stories, which, like all their books, is very beautifully created, and it has a great selection of old and new stories from The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's got Guy de Maupassant, Henry James, The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, M. R. James O'Whistle, and I'll come to you. all the excellent classics, Edith Wharton, um, Georges Louis Bourges, Ray Bradbury. So this is a really good collection if you want a good solid collection of brilliant ghostly tales from the classics. And then a more modern collection, which has also quite recently published, is Eight Ghosts, which was a book that was actually commissioned by the English Heritage Group, and they commissioned modern authors to write stories set in English heritage sites. So in this book, we've got authors as exciting and surprising as Mark Haddon, Camilla Shamsi, Kate Clanchy, Jeanette Winterson, Max Porter, Andrew Michael Hurley, and Sarah Perry. So, and these are actually all brilliant stories, which are completely chilling. And I can particularly recommend Jeanette Winterson's story, As Strong as Death, which I know I marked up for reading, but I just wonder if I'm going to have time. There's a lot of really sinister stories and moments in this book. I actually love Max Porter's Mrs. Charberry at Eltham as well. So the Jeanette Winterson one, just to tell you a little bit about it, because I always love her writing, is about a young couple just about to get married who are in Falmouth, and they're getting married in the local English heritage castle, and the story's called As Strong as Death, and I won't give you too much of a giveaway, but it is about love being as strong as death, with ghosts involved who keep turning up. And these are just a great collection as well, perfect for sitting around a fire on an October evening. So that's a few collections of stories. And then I just want to share this one with you as well, which is a bit of a more ancient collection, originally published in 1945. Best Ghost Stories. Look at this fantastic cover, chosen by Anne Riddler. And the reason I wanted to share it with you is because I love the prologue. Look, I've marked where I am with the sinister glove, which did belong to my mum. I love this bit in the prologue, which I'll just read to you, and I'd love your thoughts. One word more. It has been suggested that electric light is inimical to ghosts, and that we've therefore passed the age of ghost stories. But bright lights only emphasize the darkness outside them. Moreover, to turn on the light and find your indeterminate fears well-founded, or, as in The Apple Tree, a story lit by electric light, to feel the incubus rather than to see it. What would be worse? And yet, when all is said, it is better to know. It is better for a child to concentrate its fears on a beast which it can see than to experience them as unnamed terrors. It is also, apparently, better to feel terror than nothing at all. I have no ghosts, said Gerontian. The greatest of ghost story writers have examined the terror and defined it. This is partly why we like to read them round their circles of light. Our fears gather. So do you think that electric light killed the ghost story? I think not. I think we can still be just as terrified with electricity as we can with candlelight. And there's plenty of opportunities for the electricity to suddenly go off and leave you in pitch blackness, which is utterly terrifying, in a good old ghost story. Do any of you disagree, I wonder? Any thoughts about electricity versus candlelight? Obviously, candlelight is very atmospheric, which is why I've got my candles lit. But I think electricity is full of ghostly presences as well. Beloved by Toni Morrison is a book that must be mentioned in any discussion of ghost stories, because this is one of the most famous and one of the most thought-provoking ghost stories ever written. It was originally published in 1987 and set after the American Civil War, telling the story of a family of formerly enslaved people whose Cincinnati home is haunted by a malevolent spirit. Beloved is inspired by an event that actually happened. Margaret Garner, who was an enslaved person in Kentucky, escaped and fled to the Free State of Ohio in 1856. She was subject to capture in accordance with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And when US Marshals burst into the cabin where Garner and her husband had barricaded themselves, she was attempting to kill her children and had already killed her 2-year-old daughter to spare them from being returned to slavery. That is pretty shocking, to say the least. Morrison had come across an account of Garner titled A Visit to the Slave Mother Who Killed Her Child in an 1856 newspaper article published in the American Baptist. The novel Beloved won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1988, and it has become one of the most widely read and popular ghost stories of all time. It's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read it, read it now. It's incredibly beautifully written. It's very intense, and I won't be sharing any of it with you now because there's too many ghost stories to talk about, but I would absolutely recommend it as a fantastic read. I would also love to mention, in the same breath, Tiffany Murray's fabulous book, Sugar Hall, which is another story which talks about slavery. And it's a very thought-provoking, beautifully written book. It is primarily a ghost story, but it also, to read from the back cover, pries open a window onto a vanished decade, exploring the long consequences of old sins and the suffering of the exile, the refugee, and the powerless. I'm going to read you a little bit of it. So it's about a boy who comes to live in this big old mansion called Sugar Hall. He's called Dieter, and he meets a ghost in Sugar Hall. I'm going to read you a little bit because it's very chilling and rather fascinating. Dieter considered Sugar Hall. This place was a sort of big that forced you to make up words that had you stammering because it was ginormous. It was gargantuan. His grandfather's house was 1,000,000 times bigger than their flat, but not as big as Buckingham Palace. Maybe on the tops of his letters he should write Sugar Kingdom, Sugar World, Sugar Skies, Sugar Universe. He thought of the first night here when Ma had to lay their coats on top of the bedclothes and they all slept in the same bed, huddled, because there was nothing but the scuttle of rats and the howl of something terrible outside that tickled the white blonde hairs on his head. That first night he had decided Sugar Hall was a Black Forest gatto, the one Ma made when she was younger, once she'd saved up enough ration tickets. Yes, this place was a Black Forest gatto because it was made up of layers, of floors upon floors of rooms, and, as Sass said, God knows what lurked in the shadows. Dieter wondered if God did know, though he suspected it was more likely to be the devil, and that was why Ma had dragged a commode into their bedroom and locked them in every night. Dieter decided to make a list of facts. It was going to be very long. Sin, this is the list. Since I last wrote, these are the things I have found out. Look, you can see he's writing it in list form. 1. In this house, 21 doors are locked and 19 are open. 2. I have found a room stuffed with frightening things. Masks made of wood and animal heads are nailed to the wall. I saw 3 zebras, a lion, a tiger, and a big black cow with horns. They have glass eyes and their skins are on the floor. The masks frighten me more than the animal heads. In the same room are glass cases filled with butterflies and moths. The butterflies and moths are pinned down so they can't move. Never a good sign to be in a house with butterflies and moths pinned down. Some of them are giant and bright, but I don't like them. 4. Ma has locked this room up. 5. There is a front staircase and a back staircase. There are 62 steps to the back staircase because it goes all the way down to the cellar and all the way up to the attic. Ma said this was for servants. 6. There are 7 leaks in the attic rooms. Last month I collected 12 dead rats, 3 crows, something I think was a cat, and piles of flies in the corners. I can't count the flies. There are too many. 7. Last week we had a bonfire for the dead rats. Ma wore a hanky over her face. 8. Saskia found a thing called a priest hole, and she said that it's for Catholics, so they have somewhere to hide. Are you a Catholic, Sin? In the olden days, people called Roundheads killed people called Cavaliers in our dining room. Or is it the other way round? There are paintings of olden day sugars here. Ma says they are my ancestors. They are ugly. 8. We've been here for 77 days. 9. I can fit in the thing called the dumb waiter. I have grown 2 inches. There's a river over the fields in front of us that sometimes looks like the Thames, but I know it's not. Ma told me ponies get stuck there because the water goes away, but it always comes back. 15. I have found a boy in the sheds and he wears a silver collar around his neck. He's not a duppy, Sin. Honestly, he's a boy. He won't hurt me or stop the clocks. 16. I am lonely. 17. I wish. Deeply chilling and brilliant. That's Sugar Hall by Tiffany Murray. A ghost story. And look at the sinister moth on it. We know that we're in for a sinister treat when we have a moth on the cover or in the story. Pinned down moths always mean bad things are coming. So I would now like to move on to another fantastic ghost story which I have recently read, which is called When We Were Birds by Ayanna, Lloyd, Vanwa, who is an amazing and brilliant Trinidadian writer. And I always love Trinidadian writing, particularly when it is brilliant, like this debut author, When We Were Birds. It's a love story, a ghost story, and a thriller. So Ayanna Lloyd Banwo's radiant first novel embraces many genres, binding them through incantatory language steeped in the rhythms, fables, and spirituality of her Trinidadian homeland. This is one of those books which is great to read, but also is great to listen to, because you can really enjoy that Trinidadian accent and the Trinidadian lilt and the musicality of the language if you listen to it. But it is also a fantastic read if you are not so keen on audiobooks. So at the centre of the book, this is When We Were Birds, for people just joining, are 2 young people wrestling with their destinies. Yejide belongs to a long line of women who are duty bound to commune with the dead. Her distant mother, Petronella, has always been against this spectral legacy, but now that she's dying, it's incumbent upon her to induct Yejide into the powers that will shortly become hers. And this will actually have an immense effect of completely remaking her, affecting a transformation on Yejide's innermost being. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Darwin is a country boy who must buy medicine for Janaya, his mother, who's raised him single-handedly. He's a Rastafarian, and he has, along with his mother, various beliefs, one of which is that he should not work with the dead. However, the only job he's able to find in Port Angeles, which is a fictional town in Trinidad, the only place he can get work is in a cemetery. And in order to get work there, the only way he can do it and still feel like he is being true to himself in a way, is to cut off his dreadlocks. So he takes that terrible and vast step, which completely makes him feel like a different person. So he now gets this job in a cemetery called Fidelis, and he then starts having various difficulties with corpses and the dead and the living, who also work in this cemetery alongside him. But what's exciting is that the two young people come together in this rather supernatural style. They're brought together in a kind of mad storm, which is in a kind of dream. And it's very intense. It's a book that's very elemental, When We Were Birds. And the supernatural throughout the book is rendered in very visceral terms. So Yejide comes slowly into her powers, and when she starts to change, she registers it as a pain from deep within. She says it's like somebody sink a hook into her belly and yank from behind. So this is magic realism, but of a very visceral nature. As Darwin notes when he initially claps eyes on her, he says, "She didn't look lost or haunted, not at all. She looked damn vex." So she was kind of in a fury rather than being at all haunted. So that's a really great read, When We Were Birds. I would thoroughly recommend it. And it does have elements of the supernatural and ghosts. There's a really fantastic moment between Emmanuel Darwin and his father, which I don't want to give too much away about, but it's very beautiful and emotional, and all the more sad because it takes place in a cemetery. But you've got to read it to find out what's going on. Another fabulous ghost story is this wonderful book by Louisa Young, which is called 12 Months and a Day, which is still in hardback, only very recently published. And this is a really wonderful story about two lovers who both lose their partners to premature deaths, and um, one of them dies from a heart attack in a really tragic way, and he's only very young, he's only 30 or so. The other one dies due to cancer, which she knew was coming. They're called Rasmus and Jay, Roisin and Nico, two couples who are strangers to each other. They're both beautiful, ordinary love stories, and that's what I love about the book, is that it's a very ordinary kind of book. But what's not ordinary is that we get the perspective of the ghosts. So Jay and Nico become the ghosts. They're the ones that have died. Jay died of cancer, Nico died from a heart attack. And they're both still in love with their partners who are still alive on the earth. But they float around feeling bereft, and bereft not only of their lovers but also of life itself. And they eventually find each other, and then they become able to begin to steer what's happening in the world. Oh, great to see you there, Red Lion Books. Lovely to have you here tonight. That's Joe in Colchester. I wonder if you are a lover of ghost stories, and I wonder if you have in your shop one of the books that I've just been talking about, which now I want to show you. And I've dropped, possibly, oh no, I can't find it. It's The Haunting Season, which is a really fabulous book and which I absolutely adore. And I've just been reading some extracts from it. And it's just the perfect book to get hold of right now in this October season. So going back to Louisa Young, 12 Months and a Day, such a beautiful story. if you haven't read it, I'm not going to give away what happens, but I absolutely recommend it. It is a beautiful romantic tale, but it also has a lot of gritty life and death in it. So Joe is saying, I'm genuinely scared of ghosts, only read a few, but okay, oh, that's interesting. So we've got a bit of a Colchester link. Intriguing. Anyway, let's get back to Louisa Young. So this is such a beautiful story, and I'm going to read you a little bit of it so that you can get a glimpse of what's so lovely about it. And as I was saying earlier, one of the things I really love about it is the fact that it's so based in life, and it really celebrates life. And Louisa has this wonderful ability to observe people, which brings the book completely alive and makes it a really fantastic read, and actually very funny a lot of the time too. So I'm just going to read you a little section of it to give you a flavour. She took public transport. So, by the way, this is a ghost taking public transport, a ghost called Jay. The walk to the bus to Leverburgh, the other bus to Stornoway, the ferry to Ullapool, the coach to Inverness, the train to Edinburgh, where she sat on top of a bus shelter on Princes Street, waiting for the night train, legs swinging, contemplating members of her sex. There were very young women, very drunk women, very tired women. A skinny woman in a parka arguing in a doorway. A bus driver, huge-eyed and patient. In a bar behind the bus stop, a group of women had gathered. Jay watched them arrive, alone and nervous, and drifted in, curious. One wore a badge. Widows get together. You can talk to me. She laughed. Do ghosts laugh? This ghost does. Coincidence? Well, no doubt. The world is full of widows. You just don't notice. Their jackets lay on the banquettes, their handbags on the table among the tapas, and their Chardonnay warming as they clutched their balloon glasses. Hold it by the stem, for God's sake. It always stays cold for longer. Their feelings flowed out as the wine flowed down. She loved when their laughter got raucous and blinked when it turned to tears. One spoke about his curry spices being still in the kitchen cupboard, and she didn't cook curry. One told of trying on the first anniversary to climb a mountain they'd climbed together on honeymoon and turning back, and now she felt a failure. No, they all said, you're a success for trying. One said she wasn't sure she should be there because they hadn't been married as such. Am I a widow? Jay wondered. Who can I talk to? She watched them leave arm in arm, telling each other not to worry about their mascara. They looked lovely. She pressed her back against the plate glass windows and wasn't certain she was still human. None of them would be right for him. She's trying to find a new partner for her husband because she's died. Outside, a woman who looked like Cleopatra, her skin deep bronze and apparently made up all over, was vaping tetchily behind a twisted velvet rope. Black straps crisscrossed her narrow shoulders. A black skirt, shorter than her heels were high, wrapped tight around her tiny backside. It was clear from her every movement that she did not consider being delayed by this rope appropriate. Of course they're not right. You don't want them to be. She didn't want to see Rasmus tumbling with Cleopatra, biting her made-up flesh, breathing her heavy artificial perfume, or with any of these perfectly nice women, indulging some desire he'd never manifested in life, to go off with a woman entirely different to his wife. So that's Jay, the ghost, observing other women who are alive and wondering if any of them might be good for her husband as a replacement for herself. And it is an incredibly tragic book, with the death of the two lovers at the beginning. But then it does become a rather beautiful romance. And although there's a lot of reality in it, there's also a lot of hilarity. And Louisa Young is just a great book. And I'm also going to mention to you, because I did an event with the fabulous two ladies here the other day at the House of St Barnabas. So in my mind, they've become wedded together, even though they're very different writers. Selena Gordon, she wrote this wonderful book, Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death, which I'm sure many of you will have read already. Selena Gordon is a poet, and this is her first novel, and it's absolutely brilliantly, beautifully written. It's a kind of poetic torrent of passion, all about life, death, the Grenfell Tower disaster, the injustice of many aspects of the social world as we know it, particularly in the UK. It's a very political kind of rant of a book at times, but it's also an absolutely gorgeous, life embracing, life enhancing novel. And it is about Death, who appears in the form of an old black woman pushing a shopping trolley, who is not noticed or seen by anyone that passes that she passes or passes by her, because she is an old black woman. She is invisible, and Mrs. Death has a lot to say, and some of the book is written from her perspective. Some is written from a person of um, unknown gender called Wolf, who is in a way channeling what Mrs. Death is telling her. And I'm just going to read you a little poem by Mrs. Death. There's quite a few poems within the book, as you can imagine, as Selena Gordon is a poet. And as we also discovered at the House St Barnabas the other night, she's also a singer, and she sang an amazing song, which was very beautiful. And it was actually lovely to hear her singing. Mrs. Death sings, "And here are all your fears, in here, in here. You've got somewhere to go, let go, let go. You've got somewhere to be, hold hands with me. Time so short and sweet, no life is neat. Follow the bright light from day to night. And here are all your dreams, so small it seems. You gave all you could give, you lived to live. And here are all your fears, in here, in here. You're not all on your own, alone, alone. So don't you waste a tear. I'm here, I'm near. Just close your eyes and ears. Here are your fears, in here, in here. You've got somewhere to go. Let go, let go. You've got somewhere to be. Hold hands with me. Here are all your fears, in here, in here." That is a lovely poem. But there's another lovely poem that I wanted to share with you, if I can find it. Oh, yes, I can. Here it is. Because this one is about humankind. It's called Mrs. Death, the First Morning. That's morning with a U. The first fires, the first fires, the first morning of the first morning, the first shape of the first loss, the first fires, the first fires, the first birth, the first blood, the first kill, the first blood spill. You're only human, you're only womankind, you're only human being, you're only mankind. Be kind. The first sunrise, the first sunset, you're only human, you're only woman, you're only man, human. Be kind. Human being, kind human being. The first stars in the first skies, the first stars in the first skies. You're only human, human being. Be kind. The first cave, the first cave painting, the first word, the first art, the first heartbreak, the first morning of the first morning, the first loss, the first blood, the first war. You're only human, you're only woman, you're only human, you're only man, you're only human, human being, humankind. Be kind. So that's Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. I would strongly recommend you to get the audiobook, because then you hear Selena Gordon herself reading it. She's an amazing poet. She's also incredibly musical and poetic in the way that she reads aloud. And I would vastly urge you to listen to the audiobook if you can, because it's an actually brilliant rendition, far better than mine. Rebella, thanks for all your comments on Facebook, and I'm glad that you're enjoying the readings. It's lovely to see lots of people on both Facebook and Instagram. Um, so I then wanted to mention some other short stories, one of which is a story that comes up very frequently when I ask people what ghost stories they particularly love and who are their favourite ghost story authors. There's an amazing story, which is it a ghost story? Possibly not. I know people have different parameters for their ghost stories, and some people start recommending to me very what's the word? Stories that are more kind of magical or more fantastical. But this one, I wonder if it's a ghost story. I'd love to know your thoughts. It's by Joyce Carol Oates, and it's called Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? And I'm sure lots of you will know it because it's one of those um, very famous, chilling, and terrifying stories, which, if you don't know, it won't take you very long to read. It's probably only a half an hour read. That's one of the joys of the ghost stories, that they're often quite short. It's about Connie, who's a pretty 15-year-old girl who lives in a small suburban town with her parents and her older unmarried sister. Neglected by her father and criticised by her very sensible sister, and her mother, Connie takes solace in the knowledge that she's attractive and desirable to the boys she associates with at school and in town. During the summer vacation, Connie and her girlfriends go into town to see movies and go shopping, and they flirt with teenagers. But Connie meets a man who's quite a lot older than her, who persuades her that she ought to go with him somewhere nearby. And I won't tell you what happens, but it's a really chilling, spine tingling, and rather sinister story. I'll just read you a little bit of it because I think Joyce Carol Oates is brilliant at capturing the atmosphere of a small town and all the little different aspects of fashion and teenage behaviour. She wore a pullover jersey blouse that looked one way when she was at home, and another way when she was at home, and another way when she was away from home. Everything about her had two sides to it, one for home and one for anywhere that was not home. Her walk, which could be childlike and bobbing, or languid enough to make anyone think she was hearing music in her head. Her mouth, which was pale and smirking most of the time, but bright pink on these evenings out. So she's a girl who likes to change all the time, and she is quite vain. She's a little bit full of herself. She knows that the boys fancy her, and the story is kind of about what happens if you take a risk that maybe you shouldn't have done. It's pretty horrifying. So that's Joyce Carol Oates. Another one I'd like to quickly mention is a novel called The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg, which is one of those quite crazy books, which is a bit like a cross between The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov and maybe Jose Saramago's Blindness. Um, it's surreal and deeply passionate. It's a second novel, and it's about Claire, recently widowed, arriving in Havana, Cuba, to attend an annual festival of new Latin American cinema, which is a kind of horror cinema festival. So it's set in a festival all about horror films, which could be a bit of a red flag. We know that something bad's going to happen. And she's recently widowed. The day after the screening of the movie, which her husband Richard most wanted to see because he was meant to come, Claire, our heroine, finds him standing outside the Museum of the Revolution wearing a new linen white suit, which she's never seen before. Um, this is the beginning of a series of strange events, and it involves a strange blurring between reality and fantasy. There's quite a lot of interaction with the ghost of her husband, and really it's all about mourning and loss. But it's a very beautifully written, fascinating, and intriguing novel, as I said, with elements of The Master and Margarita in it. Then I must mention tonight another fantastic and very recently published ghost story, which is The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, which was the Booker Prize winner only a few days ago by Shehan Karanutalika. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. So Karanutalika made a splash a decade ago with his debut novel Chinaman. He was then hailed as one of the great Sri Lankan writers, and that book narrates the life, the alcohol-soaked life of a retired sports journalist who sets forth on a zany quest to track down a great cricketer of the 1980s and who's gone missing. However, his new book, The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, returns to 1980s Sri Lanka, and this also has a debauched protagonist, but he basically, at the beginning of the novel, wakes up dead. Hence, the relevance to tonight, he is actually a ghost. And when he wakes up dead, he initially thinks that he's swallowed silly pills given to him by a friend and he's hallucinating, but he actually is dead and he's locked in a kind of rather depressing underworld, which is by no means a joyous underworld or a kind of actual hell. It's just a rather depressing place where other souls are hanging around with dismembered limbs and blood-stained clothes who basically are not really in charge of their own destiny, being dead. Many of the people he meets in this rather bleak landscape are victims of the violence that plagued Sri Lanka in the 80s, including a Tamil University lecturer who was gunned down for criticising militant separatist group, the Tamil Tigers. The novel also depicts the victims of Marxist group, the Janatha Vimukti Paramuna, or People's Liberation Army, who also waged an insurrection against the Sri Lankan government and killed many left-wing and working-class civilians who got in their way. So this is a very political novel, but it's also got a huge amount of humour, and it's told from this very unusual angle. It's written in the second person, which is a really interesting idea, which I often find can be a bit alienating, but once you get into it, then you are the you in the book. And it does have this great sardonic humour running through it. There's lots of quips about what it is to be a ghost and how crowded it is being on the earth full of ghosts, but it's a really great read. So before we come to an end, I just wanted to also mention, so definitely get that book, Booker Prize winning book. It's an absolutely brilliant read and fascinating to also discover more about Sri Lanka. If it might be a place you've never been and you might not know a huge amount about it, travel to it virtually by reading. So just to zip back quickly to the ghost stories of Edith Wharton. She was actually traumatized by ghost stories in her youth. Has anyone else been traumatized by ghost stories in their youth? I think I was a bit. My mum used to love ghost stories and we used to read them together. And there's this missing collection of ghost stories, which me and my mum spent about 20 years looking for, because we both read this absolutely chilling and fantastic story, which we were both terrified by. And then we couldn't remember anything about it except what the book looked like. And we then spent the next 20 years looking for it in my grandparents' house, my parents' house, and we never found it. And now my mother has sadly passed away. I'm probably never going to find it. That elusive ghost story is lost forever. Maybe I just need to try and write it myself, and that might be the answer. Anyway, going back to Edith Wharton, who was traumatized by ghost stories in her youth, she later on went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. She channeled her fear and obsession into creating a series of spine-tingling tales filled with spirits from beyond the grave and other supernatural phenomena. While claiming not to believe in ghosts, paradoxically, she did confess that she was frightened of them. Wharton imbues this potent, irrational, and imaginative fear into her ghostly fiction to great effect. So there's a few collections of her ghost stories, and you can find some excellent ones in your local bookshop or maybe online. Edith Wharton is always surprising. Then I'd also love to just mention before we end The Shining. I was going to give you a great big spiel about it being one of the most terrifying ghost stories ever, which it is, but I'm totally running out of time. I'll just tell you a tiny bit about it before we stop. It's set in Colorado in the 1970s. Many of you will have seen the film, which is actually a brilliant, I feel, adaptation, even though Stephen King actually hated the adaptation because lots of things were done to it which completely changed the characters of the people. For instance, Jack Torrance, who is the hero, his wife in the book is quite a strong and cool woman. In the film, she just stands around screaming most of the time and doesn't really get much of a good look in at all. But anyway, to briefly tell you about it, it's about a man called Jack who goes to stay in the Overlook Hotel to look after it through the winter. And he is an alcoholic. He's trying to write a book, and he slowly starts seeing ghosts in the hotel. There's also terrifying hedges, topiary hedges that move, and his son Danny has something called the Shining, which is an ability to see into other people's thoughts, and it's really terrifying. It's still a brilliant read, and if you've never read it, I would actually hugely urge you to do so, because it is chilling, it is terrifying, and it is a great story. And Danny is a really wonderful character. There's also now a sequel called Doctor Sleep, which was written, I believe, about 20 years later, and that's about Danny when he's grown up, and he's also troubled and has his problems like his dad did. So that's The Shining by Stephen King. Great one. I never even talked about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, the ultimate ghost story. If you haven't read that, you've got to read that too. I must mention though that coming to your screens on the 30th of October, we have the big Scottish book club coming back with Damien Barr, our fabulous salonier and host. That's going to be starting at 10 o'clock on the 30th of October. Look out for that. Tune in. It's going to be fantastic. And I also just want to show you, give you a glimpse of something coming your way in all good bookshops. A beautiful gift pack of cards, Bibliotherapy for Modern Life, which is by Ella Bear 2. Don't know if you can see that there. Which is a kind of novel cure, but in card form. So look out for that. I'm going to be talking more about that next week on my personal Facebook and Instagram pages on Wednesday night. So Ollie, Rebecca, your favourite, so glad to have you affirm that once more. Isn't it the best book ever? Joe, great to see you. The publisher is Lawrence King. And I will see you all very soon. Thanks so much for coming, and enjoy those spooky books. I hope that you have some lovely spooky October evenings, and do send me messages if you get a chance to read those books and tell me how they go down. I'd love to hear your spooky experiences. Good night. See you soon.